We all know what it feels like to hit big on a running back in a rookie draft, but what matters most for these running backs? Is it draft capital, film, receiving upside, size, athleticism, a combination of these factors? Today, we are going to look at what makes an RB1 in fantasy and how every rookie running back from the 2023 NFL draft stacks up based on these benchmarks. This is going to be running backs to target and avoid in your 2023 rookie drafts. I did this video last year that you guys really seemed to enjoy, and I also did a wide receiver version of it, which I will do tomorrow for the 2023 class. This is obviously not the be-all, end-all, but it definitely posted a pretty decent success rate last year. So I'll explain more after the intro. My full rookie rankings, if you guys want them, if you want the data posted in this video, updated post-draft dynasty rankings, all of that stuff is on flockfantasy.com using the promo code FSE. You can get 2 days of a free trial, 30% off all of the packages. We are shutting down our Patreon. If you guys are just coming back to the Dynasty scene, we have teamed up with Mason at Fantasy Flock, Zach and Badake from Fantasyland, Chris and Pierre from Fantasy Endgame to bring you guys all of our bonus content together, us four creators, our rankings, all that and more in one place. And like I said, using code FSE will get you 30% off, 2-day free trial, first dibs on Dynasty Decisions videos, all that good stuff. We will be running a marathon Dynasty Decisions week next week. So all the backloaded Dynasty Decisions submissions we have, we will definitely get to those. If you've previously submitted and you have some updates post-rookie draft, of course, feel free to specify that you are resubmitting as well. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Before I get into the entire process of this video, if you guys want to just skip ahead to the end results, skip ahead to how this current rookie class stacks up, peep the timestamps along the scroll bar, link down below in the description as well. I'm going to explain the process first, but if you don't care about the process, feel free to skip right ahead. I'm also going to go a little faster than I did last year because I explained this whole thing then. So if you want a more in-depth explanation, go watch last year's video, basically, where I explained the process. Basically, what I'm doing in this video is I'm outlining a bunch of analytics thresholds that are based on RB1 finishers from 2015 to 2022. And we're going to test which ones were most common among those running backs that were RB1s in fantasy. And we're going to test the current crop of rookies based on those results and see who checks the most boxes. This exercise should help us create a roadmap for two things. Number one, identifying potential sleeper running backs that we can take late in drafts because they stack up well. Or number two, identifying potential bust running backs at the top of drafts. I don't think this exercise will tell you whether or not a player is great or not. I think it's more likely to tell you if somebody's a sleeper or if somebody's likely to be a bust, more so than saying, this is how I rate these running backs because this is what the model told me. So if player X checks 8 out of 11 boxes and player Y checks 3 out of 11 boxes, that basically should tell us that player X is a safer bet to make. We should feel more comfortable drafting that player in a rookie draft. So this is what we're dealing with here. Here are the 41 running backs since 2015 who have finished as an RB1 in points per game since that time. There's been 41 different guys. You guys can see them on the screen there. Saquon, JT, Derrick Henry, all those dudes that we know and love. Last year's video, I had 8 benchmarks that I tested. This year, I added 3 more, so I'm just going to breeze through the 8 that I discussed last year. I tested more than the 3 that I added this year. Those ones correlated most with the ones that I didn't already have. So with each of these benchmarks, you can see that you could have either missed it, hit it, or exceeded it. And these were the benchmarks I tested on the screen right now. You guys can see, were they above 205 pounds? Obviously, if you missed that, you were not above 205 pounds. If you hit that, you were between 205 and 219 pounds, which is the case for most running backs. And if you exceeded that, you were a big back, 220 plus. Same goes for all these other factors here. Over a 29 BMI, you can see how you missed, how you hit, and how you exceeded. But like I said, I'm just going to highlight the ones that I added that are new, the ones that were not in last year's video. The ones that I added that were new were positive rush yards over expected, which is basically this RYOE per attempt that you guys can see there. I wanted to find a way to quantify things like vision, like patience, and incorporate that into the model. If you're a rush yards over expected over the course of your career is a positive number, it probably means that you're a good runner of the football, that you have good vision, that you have good patience. So even though, we can't physically quantify that stuff should show up in the numbers in the rush yards over expected for your career. Number 2, the other one that I added was backfield dominator rating of above 55%. Obviously, running backs who command workloads in college tend to command workloads in the NFL, and I wanted to see if that was correlated as well. Number 3, the final one that I added to this list was PFF elusive rating above 100. And again, this is something that I value highly in the scouting process, running backs that can make people miss. PFF is a film-based software. So whether you agree or not with their grades, they chart how many tackles a player is avoiding, how many people they're making miss, and all that good stuff. And then they give them a rating, an elusiveness rating, and that correlated as well. So I decided to test that also. And here is how those percentages shook out for the common traits that those 41 running backs since 2015 who finished as RB1s shared. The size metrics being the most important, as well as ability to command a workload and dominate an offense, the speed score, followed by the efficiency metrics and the ability to catch the ball. And then ironically, draft capital and age-related things were actually the least predictive of the ones that I tested. About half these running backs were 21.9 years or younger on the draft night that they came out, or were early declared. So you guys can see basically weight above 205 pounds. Again, that's not a hard threshold for running backs to clear. So some of these are more disqualifiers than they are actual metrics that we're looking at. But it's interesting to see the makeup of these RB1s and what they all have in common or what they don't all have in common. I also wanted to test these percentages and determine what mattered most, if any of that changed, if I looked at just guys who finish as RB1s multiple times too, because obviously when we're in a rookie draft, the type of running back that we want to hit on is going to be a guy that is a multi-time RB1, your Dalvin Cook types, your Ezekiel Elliott types, guys that are fantasy relevant for a long time and can help our fantasy teams. And that produced 24 running backs out of the 41. So 24 of those 41 running backs finished as an RB1 more than once. And this is how the numbers changed. You guys can see them on the screen there. These were the new percentages. Again, you can see weight above 205 is still near at the top there. Early declare still near at the bottom. But the differences, as you guys can see on the screen, are on the right of me right now. The biggest swing that we can see from the single-time RB1 finishers to the multi-time RB1 finishers was that draft capital mattered a lot more for sustaining success. You can see 15.04% more for the multi-time finishers. 83% of them were top 3-round draft picks or better. And a lot of those, one-time finishers were able to get away with it as a day 3 pick. So early declare, age-related things, they mattered more, as did being a good running back. It looks like the positive rush yards over expected per attempt also mattered a little bit more as well. And, things like target share and elusive rating mattered a little bit less. So our takeaways from looking at this data are this. Size matters, right? Don't necessarily need to be huge, but you need to clear 205 pounds. Don't be too small. Command a workload in college and be productive as a rusher in college. Get day 2 or better draft capital, generally speaking, for long-term sustained success, but you can hit even if you're not a day 2 pick. Early declare and age-related things are a tad bit overrated. Like I said, only about just over half of them for the single-time RB1 finishers were early declares and were under the age of 22 when they were actually drafted. So early declares and age-related things, not nearly as important for running backs as it is for wide receivers. And then receiving work, also a very common thing that people talk about for wide receivers. It helps, but generally speaking, big running backs usually command goal line work, which helps offset the fact that they're maybe not getting as much receiving work. Obviously, in an ideal world, we want big backs who can command targets and run on the goal line, but that's not always the case. And you don't necessarily need to be a complete back to finish as an RB1 in fantasy if you're in a good situation or if you're very good in one area, that kind of thing. So in case you guys were curious, before I get into this year's running back class, this is how last year's running back scored out. And again, I added 3 metrics, so it's a little bit different this year. But likely, if you drafted based on some of the advice I gave you in last year's video, Breece and Walker were the top 2 running backs by a decent margin in last year's class, which most of us knew already. But Tyler Algier, Rashad White, Isaiah Pacheco, and Zonovan Knight all scored very well in this. Walker and Breece behind them was Algier and Rashad White at 3 and 4. So those 2 guys have definitely gone up in value, even despite Tyler Algier getting replaced in the draft by Bijan Robinson. He was still, I would consider, a hit before that. Of course, this model didn't predict Dameon Pierce to be great, but because his numbers weren't very good in college, you probably had to watch the film to see that coming, which is why I added these productive base metrics, because he was good rush yards over expected. He was very elusive in college, and that would have picked up in last year's model had I had that. So I also realized last year when I did this that James Cook looks to be very overrated, which probably has aged as a correct take so far in his career. Obviously, there's still time, but it doesn't look good so far. Jahmyr White, also big time overrated. Those guys were big fades for me, and I would say definitely a net positive. I didn't get everything right, but it definitely looks pretty good. So if you skipped ahead to this part, if you went to the timestamps and skipped right to this part, this is where we apply the process that I just talked about for the last 10 minutes or so to the current crop of prospects. You guys can see every running back charted out here based on all of these metrics. Like I said before, if they missed something, if they missed the mark, they were red in that category. That was -2 points. If they hit the mark, that was 1 point. If they exceeded the mark, that was 3 points. So I wanted to make the model basically work out so that if you were very good in certain areas, you could outweigh some of the things that you were missing, because I think that's true of running backs in the NFL. If you're really fast, really good receiver like devon achane, sometimes you can make up for some of your lacking areas like size or, some of your production or whatever. So as expected, as you guys can look at this, it is sorted by who has the highest point value. No surprise that Bijan Robinson should come out as the best running back in this class. If he did not, then that would probably say something about this model. I will point out that this class looks better than last year's, just generally speaking, based on the exercise. There's a lot more green, a lot more yellow than we had last year. Gibbs and achane look to be warranted where they're drafted as well right now. Gibbs, the consensus 105. Devon achane going near the tail end of first rounds, early second rounds. It looks like those guys are going to be just fine because they checked quite a few boxes. They're fast. They're good athletes. They had good production in college. Gibbs didn't command the biggest workload in the world. Achane actually bested him in that area, but nonetheless look like they are pretty good prospects. Sean Tucker being one of the highest rated things in this model here, scoring a green score. His UDFA status hurts him for sure because we don't know if he's going to get on the field or if he's even going to make the Tampa Bay Buccaneers roster. But he posted the 4th highest number of any running back in this class, despite going undrafted. So for my money, I think he's one of the best 4th round dart throws that you can have in your rookie drafts right now. I've drafted him twice so far in the early 4th round of a rookie draft. He's a UDFA, and that comes with a lot of risk, but it clearly was due to medical concerns and not due to what he did in college. Kendre Miller, another guy that's getting a lot of hype right now. I do think it's warranted. Despite the murky landing spot with the New Orleans Saints, he's a great target in the early to mid-second round because he checked quite a few of these boxes as well. The size, he didn't actually test, but I think he would have ran pretty decent for his weight-adjusted speed, and then also, good elusiveness, commanding a decent workload, all that good stuff. I'll admit that I wasn't high on Israel Abanikanda, and I'm probably still not that high on Israel Abanikanda, but had he not gotten to the New York Jets, he might have actually been a pretty good sleeper, and I think he still is one, just probably capped as like Breece Hall's handcuff at best in the long term. And then we also have Lou Nichols, who out of the woodwork actually scored a pretty decent score here with a great size profile at over 220 pounds, decent production, decent receiving production as well. He's an interesting priority free agent. I wouldn't spend a draft pick on Lou Nichols, but as a 7th rounder to the Green Bay Packers, if A.J. Dillon ever got hurt, would it shock me if he was the early down guy there? I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. And he'd be a good guy to stash on your taxi squad. As we go further down this list, we have to remember that this exercise also requires context. Again, these are not my rankings. I'm not ranking players based on this. It's just interesting to see who checks the most boxes, what boxes everybody checks, because with guys like Dewayne McBride, Tank Bigsby, and Chase Brown, you can see that they performed pretty well on the early down metrics, things like elusiveness and, commanding a workload and that kind of stuff, but they lost out as receivers, as, size profiles, that kind of thing. They can still be great role players and ball carriers at the NFL level, but that's probably the extent of what their ceiling is looking like. Same goes for a guy like Zach Charbonnet, Deuce Vaughn, and Tajay Spears, because these guys had great receiving profiles, and that might help them in their respective backfields get on the field as well. Roschon Johnson and Zach Evans were the 2 losers, I guess, of this exercise because they're buried all the way down there at the bottom. Both of these guys are going to require a bit of context because both of them lost out on a lot of these benchmarks, dominator rating, backfield dominator, stuff like that, because they were splitting backfields in college, right? Roschon Johnson obviously worked behind one of the best running back prospects we've ever seen with Bijan Robinson. And because he's 220 pounds and he was very elusive and he was more elusive than Zach Evans and his film was better, I'm more likely to bet on Roschon Johnson bucking this kind of trend here than I would be for Zach Evans, who, even though he had good competition in his backfield, Kendre Miller and Quinshon Judkins are not Bijan Robinson. So I think Zach Evans a little bit more of a fade, in my opinion, based on some of these results. So those are the big takeaways. A lot of you guys mentioned last year, and I thought it was an excellent idea, to incorporate the percentages into these scores where, if somebody rated highly in the things that mattered more, then they should get more points than somebody who rated highly in the things that mattered less. So for example, Zach Evans being under 22 years old and an early declare, that stuff didn't matter as much as, for example, Roschon Johnson being over 220 pounds, right? Like that stuff mattered more. So I factored in those percentages for a final score, a weighted point average. And you guys can see that the model really likes Sean Tucker. Even though he went undrafted, it really likes him. He's actually the 2nd highest score when you factor in these weighted averages. So definitely a great sleeper to go after. Evan Hull, same thing. Lou Nichols, same thing. Despite the bad draft capital for those players, this model seems to really like those guys. So definitely take some shots on them late in rookie drafts. Also looks like Tajay Spears and Zach Evans are a little bit overrated given where they're going. And none of these prospects are going to check every box. It's all about making the best bets possible and making the best decisions we can during our rookie draft, because nobody bats 1,000. No matter how good your model is, it's not going to bat 1,000. It's about making the best bets possible. So for what it's worth, Algier and Rashad White both scored as RB3 and RB4 in last year's class, with the same score that Zach Charbonnet, Tank Bigsby, and Chase Brown, who rank much lower in this class, have. People have been talking shit about this running back class for a while. I think they're going to eat their words. I think this class is quite strong. And at least in relation to last year's class, maybe it's not producing 7 RB1s, but I do think 10 to 15 of these guys are going to be like waiver ads or RB2 or better type options at the next level, even as soon as their rookie season. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you got some value from it. Again, this is not me to say like anybody who scored poorly in this model is bad. Anybody who scored well in this model is good. It's just to give you an extra added area of context, extra added layer of context when you're making decisions when you're on the clock. Should you go with Tank Bigsby? Should you go with Kendre Miller? Maybe because Miller scored a little bit better, you favor a guy like Kendre Miller in that decision. And that's kind of what I'm aiming to do here, because all Dynasty fantasy football drafts rely around making the correct decisions on the board, fading the prospects that you should probably fade, taking the prospects highly that you should probably take highly. And that's something that we're looking to do around here. So if you enjoyed this video, if you got some value from it, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. The wide receiver version of this video will be coming out tomorrow, and it was also quite predictive last year as well. So definitely stay tuned for that. And also, like I said, if you want access to my rookie rankings, my dynasty rankings, first dibs on dynasty decisions, this database with all the data that I broke down in this video, check out flockfantasy.com and use the promo code FSE when you sign up. You'll get 30% off any of the packages. You'll have a 2-day free trial to see all the value on the site before you buy anything. And also, you get 6 months for free if you want to sign up annually, which is definitely something that we really love that we can offer. So definitely check all that stuff out if you're interested. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.